Hello, and welcome back to the Let Me Add to That podcast. My name is Elizabeth Graswich, Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. We are the largest regional education agency in the United States. We serve 80 school districts and nearly 2 million children. We are excited to use this platform to take a deep dive into the conversations surrounding our students and schools in LA County. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, a time when we focus on an important topic impacting people of all ages and backgrounds, especially our young people. Joining us today is Dr. Lakeah Dickerson from LACOE Student Support Services Division. Welcome, Dr. Dickerson.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us is Dr. Stephany Powell, a retired LAPD sergeant who is now a Chief Educator for Positive Change Consultants. Welcome, Dr. Powell.
Thank you.
Both Dr. Dickerson and Dr. Powell work closely with human trafficking efforts, including providing resources, connecting with survivors, and sharing important insights and vital information on all things human and sex trafficking. So to get us started, we're hoping that you can help us define human trafficking. There are different types. There's a lot of misinformation about it. Where do we start?
So I like to think about human trafficking, and there's two main forms. That's sex and that's labor, right? And so in order for something to be human trafficking, it would need to involve the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And so that is to obtain some form of either sex or some sort of labor. When you think about that, you think about force, you might think about like the movie Taken, right? Something is physically forced. When you think about fraud, that's like pretending to be someone you're not, right? Or maybe promising you something with like pretending that you're going to get a job, but it's not really a job, right? So fraud, right? Mm-hmm. And coercion, I like to think about like blackmail and threats, right? And so if you don't do this, then this, right? And so those are the elements that when we think about the two forms of human trafficking that is required for trafficking.
And I'm going to add to that. So when we also talk about that coercion piece, there's an emotional bonding process that takes place. The majority of victims of human trafficking, they know their trafficker. And that could be anything from a parent. It could be a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship where the victim really depends on this person emotionally. The victim sees them as somebody that they are in love with. And in some cases, indirectly trying to help them out. So what the trafficker does is he looks for someone who might have some type of emotional gap, and they will fill that gap for that person. Again, that could be friendship, that could be love, that could be part of a parent-child relationship. And they will use that relationship to manipulate and coerce the victim in doing something that they probably normally would not do. And so that coercion piece, I think the fraud and force is really for someone to see from the outside looking in. That coercion piece is a little hard because it will look as though the victim is complacent and compliant in doing it, which also that's another aspect of it, where the person feels like they're not a victim, and because they have, air quotes, voluntarily complied, so they feel that they are part of the issue as well. So that coercion piece is very complex, and that's why it's so important for people to understand human trafficking, especially when we talk about school administrators and teachers, because the person may not present as a victim because of that coercion piece. Mm-hmm. And so having said that, teachers and administrators will have victims in their school that are in captivity at the time that they're in school. So that's why it's really important for them to understand it.
Wow. I mean, just in a matter of a few minutes, I think you both have like shed light for me already. First, the kind of labor versus the sex trafficking. I think most people think of it as sex trafficking, that the labor happens somewhere else, not here. And then secondly, the fact that it could be happening like before our very eyes. I mean, I think you're often the perception is that someone gets snatched or something off of a street, rather than it taking place perhaps in their own home, neighborhood, community, with people they know. It's just fascinating.
Kind of hiding in plain sight.
Right. And it reminds me of, the mandated, what we used to call mandated reporter. We're now trying to switch to mandated supporter, and how important it is to train staff on signs, and how challenging it can be.
So I also think what needs to go along with the definition is, what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
So when we talk about labor trafficking, just for instance, we know that outside of schools or just walking down the street in neighborhoods, you will see a poster that might say, "Do you need a job for the summer?" And then and then there'll be where you could take off the phone number, the little slips, and those are going to be the kids that you see in the supermarkets or the malls, the mini malls, who are selling candy, overpriced candy. So it might be Kit Kats for $5, and they'll say it's going to get them a trip to Disneyland, when in fact that's not what's happening.
Wow.
And so I think we have to really be careful when we see kids that are selling things like candy. That's overpriced, and they're not connected with any type of school program, football teams, Girl Scouts, and nothing like that. It's for them to get a trip somewhere. The sad part is that they never get the trip somewhere. They're usually dropped off in neighborhoods where they don't know the neighborhood. They're told that they'll come pick them up at a certain time. They never pick them up, or they pick them up late. And so that's what it may. That's just one example of what labor trafficking looks like. We know that it's happening also in agriculture. We know that it's happening also in the nail salons, hair salons. So again, it's something that's hiding in plain sight, and I think that's the part of human trafficking that we don't talk a lot about. Because it's kind of hard to understand. It's hidden. How do you know that your nail technician is being trafficked? How do you know that the kid that's offering you candy is being trafficked? So that's an example of labor. And then when we talk about sex trafficking, that will take the form of pimp-driven prostitution.
Wow. I have so many questions going through my head right now as we think about that, of like, how do you know? What would be signs to look for? And then, of course, the immediate reaction is, I'd want to do something about it.
Right. I think to add to what Dr. Powell was just mentioning, I actually experienced, I was in the Valley at a store, and a kid was, selling candy. And I said, "Hey, what is this for?" He said, "Oh, my school." He told me that the school was a school I actually know, right? And it was really far away from where he was. And I'm like, "Oh, I know that school," He's like, "Oh, I play basketball." "Oh, I know Coach so-and-so," right? And his face dropped because now the story is not really aligning, right? So I started to ask more questions. And one thing that I noticed is that when kids are coached, they have coached responses. He didn't know how to answer my questions because I had open-ended questions. And because I'm like, "Oh, I know Coach so-and-so." And he's like, and I'm like, "So what position do you play?" And that threw him off, right? Because he was used to having his script of, "Can you buy some candy? Can you?" And so in that case, red flag, right? Something's not right. And so, what I like to tell, like, the difference between when you're out in public and when you're in schools is, in public, you don't want to get involved. You don't know who's watching, who's going, so you would want to call, right? In a school setting, it is like mandated reporting. We need to report because we're in school and we're mandated reporters. And so that is an example of like a red flag when students have like coached responses, or people have coached responses, or they have like a script. You start asking open-ended questions and they're like, then it's like, well, what's really happening here? What's really going on? I think that is like a really big red flag. And for educators, like, and you start asking open-ended questions, I think that helps to like really figure out, like, are they scripted? And what is really happening? And that's one way I think people could kind of try to figure out, what is a sign.
Wow. So this all brings to mind that this must be much more prevalent than any of us realize. You've mentioned things already I just wouldn't have thought of. How do we quantify it? How do we think of it in terms of how much is happening in LA County? It's such a huge area anyway.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think one of the biggest issues is not being able to collect the data, right? Human trafficking is a hidden crime. Excuse me. And we only know what has been reported, but we also know that there's a lot of people experiencing it and they're afraid to say something, or they're scared, or they don't want to say anything. So what we do know is those things that have been reported. And I just actually got data from our partners at DCFS where they only are able to calculate, they actually only collect data that's CSEC, which is child trafficking for sex, right? Not labor at all. So within April, from April till now, they had about 1,300 referrals that are open cases of possible sex trafficking. Remember, this is only only sex, right? Not labor. And also this is possible, these are referrals. But that's a lot in terms of there's a possibility, we got to investigate, figure out what's going on. And this, again, is also just youth. And so that was a pretty high number. And that gives us a little bit of okay, so someone's seeing something. The other thing that I noticed with the data that we received was that the people who are referring, it's law enforcement, some family care providers, social workers. School, though, is kind of at the bottom of the list being referred.
Wow.
So the question is it because schools aren't seeing it, or do they not know what they're looking for, or where is that, right? And I think that's where the awareness to educators come in, because I like to think of trafficking as the idea of Where's Waldo. Do you remember Where's Waldo? Or yeah, right. So we remember what he looks like, and so when you open up the Where's Waldo book, it's all this stuff going on, and everybody's living their life. You got people playing volleyball, swimming, all this stuff, and you're looking right for Waldo. Well, we know that he has what he looks like. He has his glasses on. He usually has a backpack and striped shirt, right? I know what I'm looking for, so it's easier for me to identify it. And I think when we know what we're looking for trafficking, it's also a lot easier for us to identify. And so it happens right in front of our eyes because a lot of times we don't know what we're looking for. And so when we start to understand red flags and signs, it's a lot easier for us to kind of point out and see.
I think as you were speaking, it is pretty dire to know that it's not being reported from the schools, so to speak. When you look at the average age of entry for victims of human trafficking is between 12 and 14 years of age. So we're talking about school-age kids and some of it being missed. When you talk about familial trafficking, that usually can begin at the ages of 3 and 4 years old.
Wow.
So we're talking about kids who, for the most part, their point of contact is going to be the schools. When you're also talking about victims of human trafficking, they don't report, and so that's part of it. So if a teacher is waiting for a child to come up and say, I've been trafficked, that's not going to happen. What they need to be looking at is things like behavior. If you have a child that was at one point very quiet and now they're acting out and they're more aggressive, or vice versa, but you can't just take that behavior as a sign, that kid is being trafficked. I think it all has to begin with a point of trust.
Sure.
And so if we're talking about trust, then what we're also talking about is the role of the teacher or the administrator to build trust with their students and not come off as adversaries. Because that's when you're going to be able to ask certain questions without asking the question directly. And so I can say that because I did 30 years of LAPD, but before I came to LAPD, I was an elementary school teacher for LA Unified School District.
Oh, cool.
So I know that it can be done. I also worked in victims advocacy once I left LAPD, and I was the executive director of an organization called Journey Out, in which we assisted adult victims of human trafficking. And one story that really sticks in my head the most is a young lady who was being trafficked while she was in high school. And she said that for her, her grades were very good, exemplary. And then a stepfather came into the home and began to sexually abuse her. Her grades started dropping. From there, unfortunately, she met her trafficker online. And then she was running away a lot because of what was happening at home. And she said at first school was kind of her way out because her pimp would pick her up from school and then she'd have to work. But then that started going sideways because her personality started to change. And she ended up getting kicked out of school. She goes to continuation school. And she said to me that when the classroom started to get really loud, she would do things to get her kicked out of the classroom because she knew that she would go into the principal's office or she would just leave campus. So the loudness of the classroom is what was triggering her. And she also knew at 2, 3 o'clock she would have to go and air quotes, go work. So I say all that to say, and she said that none of her teachers ever asked her what was going on with her. Because of her behavior, it was more of, let's just kick her out of the classroom so that my classroom could be quiet. And so it goes back to the old saying of when we look at students and we look at their behavior, instead of asking them, what's wrong with you, asking what happened to you, because something has happened to her along the way where all of a sudden her grade point average flips like that. She goes from being quiet to now doing things in order to get kicked out of the classroom, and then she's being obliged without anyone trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Wow, that just breaks my heart. And it just goes to so much of the work we try to do here at LACOE. And we talk about, it does all come down to relationships, right? And checking in with kids and trying to identify what's going on. It seems like that the signs for human trafficking might be similar to signs we see for other signs of abuse or problems. Sometimes, as we're learning again through our mandated supporter training, it's also just signs of they can be confused with related to poverty or other things going on in the home. And ultimately it is really about trying to break through and trying to really understand what's going on in that child's life.
And all those things that you named are risk factors for human trafficking. It is. About, I would say, 80 to 90% of the adult victims that I've worked with were molested as children. There's a poverty into it. But also having said that, it is also happening in families that are not impoverished. And so that becomes kind of problematic. I was going to a school up in the valley that was, very high end. You had to talk to the guard before you could actually go in. And I was doing human trafficking awareness. And when I got to the guard shack, I was told that it was canceled. Well, what I know was that the parents or someone did not want that education in their schools. I think with the idea that it doesn't happen there.
Yes.
And I can tell you by dealing with the adult victims and then even dealing with the teenagers as well, I have dealt with victims whose parents were everything from the gardener to the police officer to the surgeon. So this is something that can happen anywhere.
Absolutely. I think when you're younger, right, it's like stranger danger.
Right.
Do not talk to strangers, right? And so the idea that strangers will likely harm you, still true, right? Like, still don't want to do that. However, what we know is that it is actually often people you know, right? And the data is showing families at a high percent is actually how our youth are being trafficked. And that is, scary because you're like, wait, what? But also, it also makes sense because if you're my family member, I'm thinking that you love me, so I'll do what you say, right? Like, I'm like, oh, if my uncle, right, or my aunt is telling me to do this thing, they love me. I'll do it. And so it's actually a lot easier, right, for some coercion to happen with our youth. And so I think that might be one of the things that kind of surprised me the most as I do this work. Because again, stranger danger, don't talk to strangers. That was the messaging. But in reality, it's kind of like, well, actually, families and then also traffickers are so savvy. And I think we don't fully understand the psychology behind manipulation and how that works and how easy it is to pretend to be someone you're not and promise you this. And if I am vulnerable, because that's who's targeted, right? The most vulnerable, right? If I'm vulnerable and I have a need, if you promise me that need, I'm more likely to go, right? To do whatever it is that you say. And I think that is what is so tricky about human trafficking. We know that there's so many layers. It's so complex.
I would imagine that must be one of the real needs for education and schools around it, because if the victims don't necessarily even understand that they are a victim and what's happening to them, I mean, how else would they get that information, right?
And with familial trafficking, and let's be clear, when we say the word traffickers, we're talking about pimps. It's one and the same. Traffickers just probably a nicer word. But the thing about familial trafficking, studies have also shown that it is the mother who ends up pimping out the kid.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, but it could be a grandfather. It could also be a father. Oftentimes it might be because of drugs. It might be because of trying to get rent. The one thing that we are forgetting here, or that needs to be talked about, is that, we think of us only seeing it on prostitution tracks. Let's not forget the internet. Let's not forget things like OnlyFans. So that exploitation of children is also happening online as well. And so I think that is an important factor to remember. And then that becomes the hidden piece. And who wants to tell on, goes back to what Dr. Dickerson is saying. I mean, who wants to tell on their mother? Because remember, that mother at the same time is saying, if you tell anybody, I'm going to go to jail. Your kids, your brother and sister are going to have to go into the foster system because of you. And I need you to do this for us. That's part of that coercion piece that happens.
And I think to kind of answer some of the things that you asked about, well, how would they know? Sometimes they don't know their victims. If you were to ask me, what is a pimp, right, or a trafficker while I was in high school, I would have told you, oh, someone who wears a lot of jewelry, has a lot of girlfriends, and they're cool.
That's something from a music video,
right?
Right.
That was in my high school life. That was my idea, right? Now I know. I'm like, well, whoa, wait a minute, right? And so I think about that, and we recently asked kids, they said the same thing. Because social media, portrays trafficking, especially sex trafficking, it's totally different. It's kind of cool. It looks cool. And so we have to really kind of debunk that and really explain what it is, right? Like actually what trafficking is. And I think that's, the work, of education too, right? Like to explain actually, no, like that's not what we want for our lives, like, right? Really fully understanding what that means. But I do think that there's a misalignment of understanding of, what is trafficking? What does that look like? And the same thing for labor. Like, how would we know if someone's getting paid appropriately? We don't know. So it's so hard for us to like identify and find out. We assume when we go get our nails done or we go get our hair done or we go buy, right, something from the store, that the people are getting paid appropriately. They're being taken care of. We don't know because we're not able to see that, like what is really happening. And so that's what makes especially labor trafficking so hard to identify and see. We don't know.
Yeah, it's so disturbing. The social media, digital space, I mean, you both raise it, and it's such a great point. We're dealing with so many challenges on so many levels. There's a lot of conversations around the things that social media have brought. But I would imagine, this is just one of the really scary areas, right? Yeah. And what can parents do about that? What can kids do? How can we help, and what can we tell our community?
Yeah.
In this area?
So funny story about like social media and online. I think there's some positives, obviously, and then there's some, right, we got to work on that. One thing is the ability to spread awareness, right? Like we can outreach and share a lot more. When we went through the pandemic here and I started doing a lot of the human trafficking trainings online, a lot of people were showing up. I wouldn't have been able to like host that many people, right? Like in a space. And so that was really a cool thing. We're able to outreach. And fun fact, really quick, when I was doing that, my daughter at the time was in kindergarten, so she was listening to me talk about human trafficking. Then she went back to school. When school opened back up, first grade, she went back to school, and they said, "Hey, what does your mom do? What does your mom and dad do for a living?" She's like, "My dad is a barber, and he owns a business, and my mom does human trafficking." Wait, what? No, you can't say that, right? Like, so luckily the teachers, knew that I helped prevent, but it was a whole thing. And I'm like, no, I'm going to have DCFS at the office. But I bring that up because the awareness for me was great. Like now I'm able to reach a lot more people, and that was amazing. But the thing about online is you also have predators able to reach a whole lot of people, right? I can pretend to be somebody I'm not. And I now have access to a lot of kids if I wanted, right? And so it's a great thing for us to do awareness and for advocates, right? But it also is scary because they are also using it, right? Like traffickers are also utilizing social media, pretending to be someone they're not, promising a job, pretending to be a modeling agency, right? So we have to teach our children, and I think our parents too, right? Online safety, right? We have to make sure that they know not to give all their information out. We need to make sure they know not to post your location everywhere you go, right? No one needs to know that you're going to the mall at 2:00. Let's not do that because there's so many people who are watching, and some of those people do not intend for your good, right? And so I think for parents, for educators, and for our youth, it's more about learning online safety and safeguards and rails to make sure that we maneuver online appropriately to kind of be able to prevent, right? To prevent that. And I think for parents, social media is a little bit newer. So it's like, they give their kids phones and it's like, oh, sure. They don't really know all of the people who may be able to access or, talk to your kids. And so I think it's one of those things about awareness. And I think just online safety has to be like embedded. But again, where are they learning that? Where do you learn how to not be, not tell your location. You almost only know unless like you find out the hard way. And so, that's where the awareness, I think for parents also, everybody has to kind of know.
I totally agree with that. I think parents need to understand, parents and grandparents need to understand technology. I think it's important to note that relationships that might start online do drift into real life. And that's where the danger actually comes in. Parents knowing about filters that they can place on the computers, phones. Think about it. We are allowing strangers to come into our homes through devices.
Yeah.
Predators have access to our kids through devices, the phone, the computer. An interesting thing that happened during COVID when they were giving out the Chromebooks, they were giving out the Chromebooks with no filters. So the schools didn't know. Google knew. And so as a result of that, I was working for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation at the time. And we spoke with Google about that because we knew on their end they could change that before they gave it to the schools. So thank God that changed. But when children were able to access pornography sites
through their school computers.
Through their school computers. And so parents need to, just like, back in the day you had to be at home before the street lights came on. Those types of rules need to be set when we talk about computers. Stranger danger, you mentioned that earlier. Kids know not to talk to strangers on the street. They know not to get into a car. But let them get on a gaming system. Yeah. You ask them who they're talking to. They're talking to Sam. Well, who's Sam? He's my friend. Well, how do you know? They don't know Sam. They met him on the gaming system. Sam could be a 40-year-old man in the basement, because on that end, too, with technology, there are ways in which one can disguise their voice, their faces, their pictures. We have AI in the mix. Yep. There's so many things that we don't understand as lay people that we really need to understand. And for the most part, older people are on Facebook. Kids are not on Facebook. They're on Instagram. They're on TikTok. I had, and influencers play such a huge part in the lives of our children. I had a young lady who, she was in high school. There was a woman that was an influencer, right? She was doing lipstick or makeup, something to that effect. And she reached out to the influencer just to say hi, doing a good job or whatever. And the influencer answered her. So for her, it would be like, I'm reaching out to, sure, I don't know, a star, and they answered me. What? So I'm going to feel so much better about myself because that happened. And so then a relationship kind of struck up. And so now they're messaging each other. Well, the influencer says, would you like to take a trip to Disneyland? This youth was in Fresno, so it's not like they're going to Disneyland a lot, and Disneyland is expensive. So they made arrangements, and the teenager told their mom, and here we go again, told the mom that she's going to Disneyland with her friend and their family. The mother never checked. She just assumed that, what the child was saying was true. Anyway, they ended up down here in Inglewood, and the influencer and the boyfriend told her, in order for us to go to Disneyland, you're going to have to service men. And they had her in a hotel. They advertised her online. Men, when the man came to the room, the young girl freaked out because that's not what she signed up for. Because she freaked out, it caused a commotion. The police were called. But it's something that simple the gaming systems. There's so many things that we allow in our houses that we wouldn't allow, if it was in real life. And we have to understand that there's such a blend between what is real life and what is on the internet. And so quickly, they can become the same. Because I meet you online, now I'm meeting you in person.
Such a great frame. What do you allow in your house? Who do you allow in your house? I mean, if you're right. If you're thinking about it physically, it would be a completely different conversation. Mm-hmm. So you brought up AI, and I have to go there because AI is changing so many things, right? How is this changing this area in particular? Are you seeing changes related to AI yet, or is there fear about it?
Well, so I do training not only across the country on human trafficking and child exploitation, but internationally as well. And one of the trainers that I worked with, he was like, let me show you something. And it was an app, and all he did was take a picture of himself, and then he said, make me look like a 13-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. When I saw his picture and him as a 13-year-old girl, he looked like a 13-year-old girl. What was crazy about it is that he took the picture with his glasses on. Him as a 13-year-old girl did not have on glasses. Wow. So if I'm talking to someone and they say, show me a picture, and I show that as a picture, or if it's a situation where I'm able to use my voice and the lips are moving. I mean, there's so many things that we don't know about as it pertains to that. We may not know about it, but trust and believe the predator is well versed on ways in order to trick kids.
Wow. I mean, it's just, and this is only the beginning, so I can only imagine. What can schools do? How can they help educate our communities about this and the dangers and the signs and who to call?
Yeah, so Dr. Powell mentioned it earlier. The one of the most important things, and it sounds kind of like cliche, but is we really have to build trust with our students so that if something is happening, that they trust you enough to come say something, right? So that I think is important. But I think also we have to talk a little bit more about signs, and we have to talk a little bit more about the dangers of, human trafficking, as well as the dangers of online, safety too, as it has to be talked about. I think parents have to be involved in the conversation because really they just don't know. And so we have to work as a community. Community also needs to know. I had a community member call and say, hey, there's a bus route where the school is dropping these kids off right here, and it's a lot of people hanging out right here. It's a hotel right here. It doesn't feel right. What can we do, right? And so that was a community, a business man called and said, I don't like it. It feels weird. It's a lot going on. Can we figure out how we can get the school to reroute this bus to go down the street around? Because I don't want the kids here, right? And so, and we did. We had to talk to transportation, and we talked about it, and we were able to do that. But that was a community member saying, this looks fishy. There's people who keep trying to talk to these kids. I don't know what is happening. I don't like it. Let's try to figure it out, right? And so that is really just everyone being involved. And I think when we talk about professional developments for schools and educators, teachers show up for that. Admin, you have your counselors, your helping professionals, but we also need our bus drivers in there. We need our cafeteria workers. We need our yard duty. Everyone needs to be aware and to know, because everyone is seeing the children, seeing the youth. And so if I see something going on the yard, I need to be able to know what to do and say something. And so it's really awareness. We need to know that it is happening, and we need to know how to prevent and how to help our youth if they come and disclose, hey, something is going on. My mom, I'm not supposed to say anything, but my mom said, what do I do? like we need to be prepared, and we need to be able to be to respond and to help support when they do say something. And so I think that is like the big, I think awareness, there's a lack of awareness. We do not know. Every time I go to do a training at a school, people are just like, wait, what? Right? And so we have to talk about it, and I have to give examples, and I have to pull up articles of local, because that's the other thing. People think it happens over there, like way over there, you know? And I'm like, no, it happens here. It happens here. And so a lot of times I'll pull articles and I say, look, this is, you know, a bus that just happened here, you know, and this is what's happening over there. And so I think the awareness is where we are, you know, locally. I think we have to start talking about it is happening. And it is happening to our youth. We have to stop it. But we don't know how to prevent it if we don't know what's happening. And so that's where I think we have to begin.
And awareness brings about prevention. Mm-hmm. And so how do we do this? We have to not be afraid to talk about it. Because while we're not talking about it, the predators are talking to our kids about it. In terms of prevention, we have a tool in the schools in California. There was a bill that was passed, AB 1247.
27.
AB 1227, yes. And what that said was that human trafficking prevention had to be taught in the schools in the state of California. You'll talk to some school districts and they don't even know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. I think that came about, was that in
2017 or 18?
Yeah, so but here was the problem. The problem was the bill was great, in which human trafficking awareness had to be taught in middle and high schools. Mm-hmm. No money came with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we talk about how can we do this? How we do this is that administrators and community needs to make sure, demand that funding is brought into the school systems. So that AB 1227 can actually be used. The other part of that was they told the schools that they had to do the prevention or the awareness piece, but they didn't say who was going to teach it. Mm-hmm. So the schools are going like, this is great, but who teaches it? The counselor, the PE teacher? What do we do with this? And so it's great that we have a law, but we need money behind it. We need people to go in there and properly train. A teacher is not going to know. I mean, they'll soon know, and then maybe that's the train the trainer aspect of it. But just going in cold, they're not going to know how to do that. So I think that those things are really important when we talk about what to do. We know what to do. There's a toolkit out there on how to do it. We just need to be able to do it. We need to be able to assist the schools to do what they need to do in order to bring about this awareness and prevention piece.
And let me add to that, because that's exactly what the schools were saying. They were like, okay, so you're saying we have to do the training. Who's going to do it, right? And here at LACOE, and I was trained, right? And so I was able to do that. But a lot of schools were like, we didn't know, and we didn't know who to call, and who we don't have money, and we don't. And so absolutely. So we have the bill, which is how we were able to get schools to agree to get the training, because I think I also had the experience you had, Dr. Powell, where some schools were like, trafficking isn't happening over here. We don't need you to come talk to us. It's okay. We got it. Like, we don't need that. Right. So we have that. But then when I say, well, actually AB 1227 says that, then it's like, oh, okay, you can come. Right. But then some schools are like, well, who do we call, and who do we teach, or what curriculum do we use for our students? Who can talk to the students? And, you know, when we were going through the programs that we offer, science teachers were like, I'm sorry, but I only know science. That's all I got. I don't know what else to tell you, right? They didn't feel comfortable, because think about it, like talking about sex at a school, right? that's uncomfortable for some people, and they're like, no, I'm only teaching math. I don't know how to do that. So then we were like, okay, let's try to get our counselors, or not every school has a counselor at their site. So really trying to figure out who is the person to help, be that advocate to train and to do the work. So the bill is amazing, but without the funding, it does bring a lot of challenges. And with the bill, it didn't come with like curriculum. Who is this and who is that? And luckily, because we did have the human trafficking grant with the federal government, that was great because we kind of got some federally approved curriculum. So that was amazing because now we have referrals. We can you can talk to this, organization or this organization. They went through the federal government and got it approved. And so that's helped, a little bit. And so now it's again saying, hey, schools, here's some people you can call, but that also costs money. Those curriculums are federally approved, but they still cost money. And so I think if I had a wish list, it would absolutely be for some funding to be attached to the efforts, because I think we can do a lot more work with staff actually being able to go out and say something and share, and also to have curriculum free for our school districts to actually use and utilize.
And I actually wrote a curriculum using AB 1227 as the foundation for that curriculum, because as I said, I used to teach in LA Unified, and my doctorate is in organizational leadership through education. And I think that fear of how do you talk to kids about sex, you don't have to talk to them about sex, because really what happens, remember I talked about especially pimps that are going after, let's say it's a male-female type of relationship, it all boils down to self-esteem. And that's one of the things that I built in my curriculum is the self-esteem part. A pimp once said that if when they're looking for a girl, if they cannot find a weakness, they will create one. That's huge. So what that says is it's like throwing spaghetti out of the wall. Pimps will talk about the fact that they might address maybe 10 girls. If one of them they're able to coerce, that that's their moneymaker right there. And in speaking of that, what also causes a danger, so to speak, is that the younger the girl or the boy, because we can't forget that boys also are victims of human trafficking, that the younger they are, the more money they make. Well, the girls that I worked with that were like 22, 23, they were aging out on the street. So here you have victims that are seen as commodities, and the younger they are, the more money they make for the trafficker. So that becomes the target, and so the building of self-esteem, because when you're strong, first of all, you're not going to kind of go with the okie doke. Parents also have to be aware, because what I also found was the kids that had the most support were also the ones that did not fall victim, or it was a little harder to convince. And so all of this needs to be brought out to the public, because there's ways to prevent this. And I think schools, what place do you have where you have an audience that basically can't go anywhere? And that audience is your most vulnerable. That audience is at high risk of being trafficked. The schools have an opportunity for this prevention piece. And again, money has got to go into the schools. We've got to talk about it, because while we're not talking about it, unfortunately, victims are being made. And I do mean being made and coerced.
And I think talk about it at a younger age too, like healthy boundaries and, saying no, right? Peer pressure. These are things that you kind of got to talk to the kids about younger, because if you know that at a younger age, it is going to be a lot more difficult for you to coerce me, because now I know, like, oh, that's peer pressure. If I don't want to do something, I'm not going to do that, right? And Dr. Powell talked about the age. It is getting younger and younger, because it's easier to coerce younger and younger because they don't know, right? And so really teaching. AB 1227 talks about, you need to be trained once in middle school and then once in high school. We really actually need to talk to our elementary kids about friends. What is a friend? What is a good friend? What is a healthy relationship? What is a relationship not so great? How do you feel when you're around certain people? What does that feel like? Does that make you sad or what? We have to talk about that stuff at a lot younger age.
And when you say a lot on a younger age, the first thing I think about is a stat that I looked at when they talk about the age that children are exposed to pornography, because that kind of softens the target, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the average age that children are being exposed to pornography is 9 years old. So while we're thinking, well, they're too young for us to talk about it, they're seeing these images on their computer. When you talk about the algorithms, if you have a child that how often are we looking at something online and a porno site will pop up or something inappropriate will pop up? And you're like, where the heck did that come from? Mm-hmm. Well, imagine that happens, let's say, with a young boy who's curious. He's going to click on it. Once he clicks on it, then the algorithms are going to start suggesting these things. Mm-hmm. Well, that softens the target, because unfortunately, if that same child does run into a predator, believe it or not, they use pornography as their training film, so to speak. Well, if the child has already seen it, they kind of already know. They already know about sex. And think about it. Even if it's not happening in your home, what about when they spend the night somewhere, mm-hmm. and they're on computers? How often do kids come over to someone's house and the kids are all in one room and they're looking at computers and they're looking at their phones, and the parents don't stop in to see what is it that they're looking at? And so again, that's that awareness piece. That is so extremely important. And the schools indirectly play a part. And I'll give you a really quick scenario. So I have a granddaughter. At the time, she was 5 years old. I do better with older kids. So when she comes over, I don't know what to do with her. So I said, so what do you want to do? And she said she wanted to make slime. So I was like, yeah, so how do we do that? 5 years old. She told me we could go on YouTube and look at the instructions for slime. Then she says, and this is when my police brain kicked in, she says, we can also do a video. Mm-hmm. So, alarm bells are going, like, okay, so how do we make a video? And so she showed me on my phone, and then she said we can upload it to YouTube. Wow. The reason why it gave me pause, because I have also worked with victims of OnlyFans. When you talk about sexual exploitation and how these videos are uploaded to porn sites or onto the dark web, and here a 5-year-old is telling me how to make a video, and I asked her, how do you know that? And she said, I learned it in school. Now, of course she learned it in school, because kids need to know about technology. Mm-hmm. So it's not the school's fault, but what I'm saying is that knowledge can play into mm-hmm. making them a softer target when we talk about that predator.
Absolutely. And it's funny, but it's not funny, because it's like, I didn't think about that, but similar to like with the pandemic, when we all sent computers home and all the kids just had to figure it out. The online safety piece wasn't embedded in that, And it's the reality of where we are. And as we like, and you might experience this too, as we continue to like grow and learn and go to more trainings about trafficking, it's getting crazier and crazier for me. Like, I'm like, oh my, I can't keep up. Like, new apps and do this and this is happening and AI. And now people are making, having this body and putting AI is putting that face on it. And now it's hard to keep up, really. And so I think we have to step up, right, in making sure that we are aware of those basic foundational pieces of like, there are some really great things about online, right? There's some great things about, I love shopping online. It makes my life so much easier. You don't have to go in the store. I love that. But there also are some things that we have to be aware of. And I think that's the thing that we have to, pay attention to and be mindful of, because there are some great benefits to being online, but there are some people who are looking to be online for the wrong reasons.
And who we need to bring into the conversation are the students.
Mm-hmm.
So as we are building these types of curriculums or having this type of conversation, let's not forget the students, because what I don't know about the dangers of the things that they're seeing, they do know. And so they need to be part of that teaching component, not only students, but also victims, because that's how we all can really learn and to stay safe. Recently, I was in Trinidad, Tobago, and I was talking to students about online safety. And I asked them the question, what am I missing here? What do I need to know in order to keep you safe? And I was really surprised, because these kids were like 12, 13 years old. And they said, and one student got up and they said that the parents need to have more restrictions. Adults need to have more restrictions on us as it pertains to online. But they also said that adults need to understand that they are also the role model. Mm-hmm. So while we're telling kids, get off your phone, but yet you go to dinner and the parent is on the phone as well. Mm-hmm. So here, what struck me most is what they're saying is how you can help me is by having more adults involved in what I'm doing, as opposed to a hands-off approach. So again, learning from students, asking them the question, what is the thing that scares you most about being online? What are some of the things that you've seen? And I'll give one last example. I think it was on TikTok where they were doing the silhouette challenge. Mm-hmm. And on the silhouette challenge, what it was, and it was innocent enough, was who can make the best silhouette, and it was with a red filter on it. So the best way to do a silhouette is if you hardly have anything on or nothing at all, or a bathing suit. And so here's the scary part. Predators that were online figured out how to remove the red filter, and then they were uploading those images to porn sites. Again, asking what is out there. What are some of the challenges that are out there? Who has contacted you and you thought was kind of icky, and what did they say? See, that's how we learn. We also have to learn from them.
Absolutely.
Well, you certainly got my attention, so I'm sure you've gotten the attention of our audience. Are there resources that we could point them to in terms of being able to learn more?
Yeah, so a few that come to my mind that I think about, I like, especially for families, I really love 146, great for family resources, great for students as well. As far as educators or education, you can go to 3 Strands Global has really great resources. Polaris has great resources. They also do a lot of data. Office of Trafficking in Persons, and that is who helped us with our federal grant. They also keep toolkits and things on their website. I Empathize is another really good one. There's another one called CAST, Coalition of Abolished slavery and trafficking. They operate from here in LA, and they have some great stuff. What am I missing, Dr. Powell?
The Blue Campaign.
Yes.
CAS is good for labor. I would use CAS for labor training. But the Blue Campaign is one. My curriculum, my choice, my body, my rules. I have a facilitator guide to be able to help teachers as well as the actual workbook itself. Those are the ones that I think come to mind for me, because I think you basically hit them all. And there is some curriculum that you can find online. The Blue Campaign does an excellent job, and you can best believe that during this month of January, they are going to. It's going to be really easy to find those resources online.
Well, and we'll be sure to post some of those into our show notes for our listeners. And I just can't thank you enough, Dr. Dickerson and Dr. Powell. This is just such a great conversation. I learned so much. I thought I knew a lot. I don't now realize I don't. And so I'm so grateful for you highlighting the importance of this topic. And as we enter into Human Trafficking Awareness Month, if you or someone you know needs help, please reach out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888 or text HELP, HELP, to 233-733. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and together we can make a difference. Again, thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Please follow the Los Angeles County Office of Education on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Los Angeles COE. That's Los Angeles COE. Or you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Los Angeles County Office of Education.